Hey friends, welcome into another edition of 4 Minutes on Friday. Wanted to let you know that for today and at least the next episode, and there might be more to it than this, we're going to talk about something I've been doing a lot of reading and talking about. Actually, a lot of reading and conversations about, and that is the topic of deconstruction. But before we get there, this will kind of lead us to that spot. We talk in our culture all the time about the nature of toxic relationships. It is something that volumes of books and articles have been written on toxic relationships, how to spot a toxic relationship, identify if you're in one of those, how to then extricate yourself from those relationships, how to get out of those relationships, and then once you're out of those toxic relationships, how to move on. Because again, that can be another part of the process is not making the same mistakes and launching yourself into another toxic relationship. So all of that is, I think, extraordinarily important. And like I said, there's a ton of really good stuff that's been written on that topic. So I'm not going to go into that. The part that I think is extraordinarily important is the church's role in this. And really, today and next week, we're going to talk a little bit about the church's engagement with the whole conversation of deconstruction, because I think that this issue of toxic relationships is part of why people land in a place where they're like, you know what, this thing with the church is not working for me anymore. And again, we'll get into a little bit more of that in next week's episode. But the issue of toxic relationships, I think we talk about it in church and we go, okay, hey, if this is where you are, and we equip people to identify toxic relationships and even we'll walk with them to get out of those toxic relationships, which is all really good and important work that the church should be doing. The thing that the church does not acknowledge, or even from what I see, I'm one person with a limited scope of what I see. But from what I see, I don't know that the church acknowledges that maybe they are the toxic relationship in some people's lives. The reason that I land on that question and that wondering, that kind of musing is because of things that I've listened to, and I think I maybe have referenced this. There's a podcast out called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. It's about a church out in Seattle, Washington. If you're not part of church world, this probably doesn't matter to you at all. But this podcast broke down the toxic relationship that the pastor and ultimately the church leadership had with the rest of its congregants and the way that they led that organization, which ultimately led to its downfall. There was, by the indications of things that I've read about this church and people who were involved in this church and listening to the whole of that podcast, and they are long episodes, and there's probably 10 or 12 episodes, and many of them are more than an hour. There was no admission that maybe we are the toxic relationship in people's lives, and made, of course, then no effort not only to acknowledge that might be the case, but then to change it. Because if you don't acknowledge it, there's nothing that you admit that you have to change. So, there's a slippery slope that we ride down there. I'm going to talk next week a little bit more about deconstruction, actually what is good about it, why it matters, why it's important, why the church can't ignore it. But maybe there needs to be an acknowledgement, maybe that you as an individual are involved in a toxic relationship that you need to get out of. And if that's the case, then reach out to somebody that you trust. Let somebody know that this is what's going on and something about your life in your relationships needs to change. If you are involved in a church, be willing to ask the church, the leadership, some important questions about the nature of your relationship and how they engage with you and what it is that they are doing. Because, man, I'm telling you, this conversation is extraordinarily important. And if you're involved in a church, especially if you're involved in the leadership of a church, you know that coming out of this pandemic, it has been incredibly difficult to get people to come back to church and be there in person. And there are probably 100 different reasons why that is the case. But I sometimes wonder if people see their relationship and their connection to a local church as a difficult relationship to maintain. And if that's the case, man, we should be doing some self-examination. All right. I hope you're having a great week. We'll see you next Friday.